Please be seated. I, throughout my time working for the church, have served on many committees. And some of them have been positive experiences, some of them have been negative experiences. But there was one committee that I served on a couple of years ago that I would say I was proud to serve on. And that was the Synod Executive Committee in my last diocese. And the reason that I was proud to serve on that committee is not because of what the committee did or what it stood for. I was proud to serve on that committee because a mentor of mine, the late Bishop-elect John Mead, asked me personally to put my name forward to serve on that committee. John was my examining chaplain who walked me through the ordination process. He was a heavy influence in my life and shaping me to be a priest and to be the person I am today. So John's opinion of me mattered a lot to me. And so when he asked me to put my name forward for this committee, it didn't feel like some sort of job or another task to do. It felt more like an honor or a privilege. Like, this is someone I really respect, and they're asking me to do this. Therefore, I'm definitely going to do this because I value this person and I value what they think of me. Therefore, I put my name forward, I was elected to committee, and I served on it for my time that I was elected to serve. And the reason I'm sharing this personal story with you this morning is because I think it reveals a universal truth about us human beings. And that truth is that when we are asked to do something by someone we love and respect, we take that thing a lot more seriously. We would just reflect upon your own life and think of a time when someone who was maybe your mentor, a loved one, someone you really looked up to, when they asked you to do something, it meant more. You put more of yourself into it. You felt almost honored to do that. Where if you think of any other instance in your life where someone asked you to do something and your opinion of them was kind of, it definitely didn't feel like a labor of love. You didn't put the same amount of yourself, your pride, all of yourself into doing that thing as you would as if the person who you really looked up to had asked you to do it in the first place. And this human emotional dynamic of being asked by the right person in order to do something is worth discussing because it's a good way of framing and looking at our faith and how we follow Jesus. For in our gospel reading this morning, we are reminded of an important foundational truth, that it is God who asks us to be followers of Jesus and not the other way around. Now in our gospel reading today, we continue to read from the 6th chapter of John. And today we read the first of 7 very distinct passages in the Gospel of John that are called the I am passages, where Jesus says, I am something, and then does a bit of explaining about who he is. And today he says that I am the bread of life, which of course raises the question, what did Jesus mean when he said, I am the bread of life? Well, in Jewish circles in Jesus' day and time, bread was another word for divine instruction or divine word. So when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, he's saying that I am the divine word. I am God's instruction. So you can understand why when he said this, people immediately balked, because Jesus was claiming for himself a pretty high authority. He was saying that my authority is at the same level as the Bible. And that made a lot of people in his day and time very uncomfortable. And so when people became uncomfortable with Jesus claiming this authority, he responded to their complaints and their doubt in kind of a very sort of weird and confusing way. He says that no one comes to him unless the Father sends them to him. And only those who hear the Father speaking in Jesus are the ones the Father has given Jesus. Which kind of seems a little hard to follow, but what Jesus is trying to sort of say here is that he can claim this divine authority, that he is the bread of life, because people are following and believing in him and have given him this divine authority by following and believing in him. And that wouldn't have happened unless God had allowed it to happen. So basically, God is the one revealing to these people that Jesus is the bread of life and making them follow him. Now, the logic Jesus is using here is interesting for sure, but I think what is more interesting and what we can kind of extrapolate out of this scripture for ourselves today is that our decision to follow Jesus is often one that we frame as our own. It's a decision that we make. But Jesus is saying here today that that's not actually true. The decision that we make to follow him is one that God is making within us. God makes the first move. God asks us to follow Jesus, and then we decide to follow. Which makes a lot of sense if you kind of stop and reflect upon your own faith journey. Because you would probably say that one of the reasons you follow Jesus today is because maybe a certain person had an influence you in your life. I know I'm a Christian today because of my father. His faith is a great model to me. I saw that coming up, and I knew that was something I wanted to have in my life, and therefore I follow Jesus partly because of my father. And I'm sure there's a person in your life that you follow Jesus today because of that person, or maybe a certain event or something else. Whatever it is, that person who led you to follow Jesus, what Jesus is saying, God was behind all of that, behind the scenes. God was working through that person, that event, and you. And therefore, it was all a part of God's plan. Jesus is saying faith is not something that we just come to on our own. It's something that God is calling us into, asking us to follow his Son, the one who loves us and died for us. So all of us have people in our lives who we love and respect. And all of us know that when those people we love and respect ask us to do something, we put our best foot forward. And we do that because we think so highly of that person, and we want to show our appreciation for them in doing what they have asked us to do to the best of our ability. Now today we're challenged to ponder that it is God himself who asks us to follow Jesus. It might have been through another person or event in our life that we came to make that decision. But however it happened, God was the one behind the scenes, directing it and making it all possible. For according to our gospel reading today, faith in following Jesus is not something that we do alone, but it's something that God does within us. Faith is our response to God's request. Why don't you follow my Son? Which is a beautiful thing when you stop and think about it. And while we're speaking about God making us requests and asking certain things of us, I think we cannot end our reflection on our readings today without taking a little bit of time briefly to look at our second reading from the book of Ephesians. For in the book of Ephesians, we hear another request that God is making of us that I feel is very particularly poignant and relevant to this very partisan and divided time that we live in today. And that request is this: to put away from you all bitterness, wrath, and anger, and wrangling and slander, and together with all malice, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ has forgiven you. This day and age, I think one thing God is asking of us is to really embody this verse for our country. In a time where people have forgotten how to be kind to one another, that's something we as Christians can do. We can be kind to one another. We can do that to model how Jesus has cared for us and how we're supposed to actually treat one another. So, as God has led us into all faith, and as God has given us the grace to follow Jesus, let us remember that God is with us still in our decisions of faith. And God is calling us to be kind to one another and to love one another as his Son has loved us.